journal was weathered, its leather cover cracked and stained with salt. I found it half buried in the sand near the beach, its pages fluttering in the sea breeze. Intrigued, I took it back to my rented cottage, eager to discover the story it held within its ancient bindings. As I settled into an old armchair, I opened the journal and began to read. June 15th, 1874. Today, we set sail from the coast of Ireland, bound for the New World. The seas are calm, and the sky is clear. The crew is in good spirits, and the wind is in our favor. I feel a great sense of adventure and anticipation for what lies ahead. This journey across the North Atlantic Ocean promises to be the beginning of something grand. June 20th, 1874. The days have passed uneventfully. The monotony of the sea is broken only by the occasional sighting of a distant ship or a playful pod of dolphins. I have grown fond of the rhythmic creaking of the boat and the gentle rocking of the waves. There is a peace in this vast expanse of water that I have never known on land. June 25th, 1874. We encountered a fierce storm last night. The sky turned black and the sea roared with fury. Waves crashed over the deck and the wind howled like a banshee. The crew worked tirelessly to keep the ship afloat, but it was no use. The ocean swallowed us whole. The tone shifted dramatically after this entry. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the page, sensing the dread that lay ahead. June 27th, 1874. I awoke on the shore of a strange island. There are no other survivors as far as I can tell. The wreckage of our ship is scattered along the beach, but there's no sign of life. I'm alone. The island is covered in dense jungle, and an eerie silence hangs in the air. I have no choice but to venture inland in search of food and water. June 28th, 1874. This place is not natural. As I ventured deeper into the jungle, I felt eyes upon me. I heard whispers in the rustling leaves and saw shadows flitting at the edge of my vision. I discovered the remains of my fellow passengers, half-eaten and discarded like carrion. There are monsters here, creatures of nightmare that hunt in the dark. I barely escaped with my life. June 30th, 1874. I found a temple deep in the heart of the island. It is ancient, built of black stone covered in strange, unreadable hieroglyphs. I have taken shelter here, hoping it will provide some protection from the horrors outside. I'm tired and hungry, but fear keeps me awake. The whispers are louder here, the shadows darker. I can feel the presence of something ancient and malevolent. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic as the entries continued. July 2nd, 1874. I awoke to darkness. The moonlight cast an eerie glow through the temple's entrance. My eyes adjusted slowly, and then I saw it. A giant creature, towering over the temple, staring down at me with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. Its form was monstrous, a writhing mass of tentacles and wings that blotted out the stars. I fled back inside, my heart pounding in my chest. July 4th, 1874. I am losing my mind. The creature watches me always, its eyes burning into my soul. I hear its voice in my dreams, calling me, taunting me. The temple offers no sanctuary. I must escape this cursed island. I have begun constructing a makeshift boat from the wreckage on the beach. It is a desperate plan, but I have no other choice. July 6th, 1874. The boat is ready. Tonight I will attempt to sail away from this nightmare. The creature was watching as I worked, its form a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. It knows I am leaving, and it does not care. I can feel its gaze upon me even now, as I write these final words. The last few pages of the journal were filled with frantic, incoherent scribbles and strange symbols that made no sense. It was as if the writer's mind had broken completely. But one thing was clear. He had managed to leave the island, though at a terrible cost. I closed the journal, my heart heavy with the weight of his tale. As I gazed out at the darkening sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, just beyond the edge of the beach. The air grew colder, and a sense of unease settled over me. I knew then that his story was not just a madman's delusion. Something had followed him from that island, and it was still here, waiting, watching, and biding its time. And I, foolishly, had opened the door to its world. The summer evening was warm and sticky, the kind of night where the air feels thick enough to drink. My two best friends, Ryan and Max, and I were doing what we always did during summer break, hanging out and looking for something to do. We were lounging on the cracked, concrete steps of our apartment building, debating where to go for dinner. "How about we hit up the new burger place on 8th, Ryan suggested, flipping a worn baseball cap around on his head. "I heard they have killer milkshakes." Max and I nodded in agreement, and we set off. The walk was only about 10 minutes, and we didn't mind the exercise. We joked and laughed, the sounds of our banter mixing with the distant hum of cicadas. Halfway there, we had to cross a busy intersection. The traffic light was taking forever, and when it finally turned green, we dashed across the street. That's when it happened. A car came barreling through the red light, missing Ryan by mere inches. The screech of tires and the blaring horn made my heart jump into my throat. Ryan stumbled back, his face pale. "Dude, are you okay?" Max asked, his voice shaky. "Yeah, I'm fine," Ryan muttered, brushing off the near-death experience with a forced laugh. "Let's just get to the burger place." We shook it off as best we could, trying to recapture the lighthearted mood as we reached the restaurant. The food was good, and the milkshakes were indeed killer, just like Ryan had said. For a while, it felt like the scare had been just that, a scare, nothing more. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we decided it was time to head back. The walk home took us down a quieter, more wooded road, a shortcut we often used to save time. The trees loomed overhead, casting long, creeping shadows across the pavement. We were about halfway home when Max suddenly stopped and squinted down the road. "Hey, is that guy staring at us?" Ryan and I turned to look. There, standing under one of the old flickering street lamps, was a figure. He wore a bowler hat and a trench coat, but the failing light made it impossible to see his face. The hat cast a shadow that obscured his features, making him look more like a silhouette than a person. "Creepy," Ryan muttered. "Let's keep moving." As we started walking again, I glanced back. The figure was still there, but this time he was closer, moving toward us with a slow, deliberate gait. My stomach twisted with unease. "Guys," I said, my voice trembling. "He's following us." Ryan and Max turned again, and we all stopped dead in our tracks. The figure was now directly under the next street lamp, his features still indistinguishable. It was like the light itself refused to reveal him. "Run," Max whispered, his voice barely audible. We took off, our sneakers slapping against the pavement as we sprinted toward the apartment complex. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't dare look back, too terrified of what I might see. When we finally reached the complex, we stumbled into the courtyard, collapsing onto the grass. Our chests heaved as we tried to catch our breath. I glanced back down the road, but the figure was nowhere to be seen. It was like he had vanished into thin air. "What the hell was that?" Ryan asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking. "But I'm glad we got away." We sat there for a while, trying to make sense of what had just happened. We talked about it for days, weeks even, but eventually, the terror faded into a sort of uneasy memory, something we tried not to dwell on. Still, even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that the figure was more than just a man. It felt like an omen, a warning of something darker, something we had narrowly escaped. We never saw him again, but every time I walk down that wooded road, I feel his eyes on me, a cold shiver running down my spine. Was it a sign? A warning? Something evil? We'll never know. But one thing is for sure. That summer night changed us all. We grew up a little faster and learned to be a little more cautious. Because sometimes, the shadows hold more than just darkness. They hold secrets. And sometimes, those secrets are better left undiscovered. The fire crackled in the center of our campsite, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. 7 of us, close friends since high school, had gathered for a weekend of hiking and camping, a tradition we had maintained for years. After a day of exploring the dense woods, we finally settled down. The warmth of the fire and the companionship making the world feel just right. We were laughing and joking, passing around marshmallows and cans of beer, when Mark leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Want to hear a scary story?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspense. Our ears perked up. Mark was notorious for his scary stories, and they never failed to send chills down our spines. We leaned in closer, eager for whatever tale he had up his sleeve this time. "There's an infamous monster named Harry that roams these woods," Mark began, his voice dropping to a low, eerie tone. "Harry is a wendigo-like creature that has caused multiple disappearances of hikers and campers over the past decade." Lena, ever the skeptic, rolled her eyes. "There have only been 4 disappearances in these woods, Mark." Kyle, quick to respond, added, "That we know of." Mark continued undeterred, his eyes narrowing as he spoke. "People who have escaped Harry claim he's a giant, lanky creature. He stalks groups of campers, infiltrates their camps, and attacks during the night. Stories say he's as ferocious as a bear or a pack of wolves tearing through a campsite. But Harry likes to play games. He kills off each member of the group one by one without the others knowing. And when he's down to his last victim, he sheds his human guise and reveals the true monster beneath. He tortures and makes his final victim suffer until daylight." The fire crackled loudly, making us jump. We laughed nervously, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over us. Sandra, who was sitting next to me, shivered and pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "All right, Mark, that's enough," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're scaring me." We all laughed, but there was an edge to it, a nervousness that hadn't been there before. The forest around us seemed to close in, the darkness pressing down, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sounded ominous. For a moment, we sat in silence. The only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. It was Kyle who first noticed something was wrong. "Hey guys," he said, looking around the circle. "Where's Sandra?" We all glanced around, and my heart sank. Sandra was gone. Just moments ago, she had been sitting beside me, her face illuminated by the firelight. Now, there was only an empty space where she had been. Panic set in immediately. We called her name, our voices echoing through the trees, but there was no response. Flashlights in hand, we spread out to search the immediate area, hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline. "She was just here," I muttered, trying to make sense of it. The forest around us seemed to close in, the darkness more oppressive than ever. "Lena, over here." Mark's voice cut through the night, filled with urgency. We rushed to his side, finding him standing at the edge of the clearing, his flashlight illuminating a set of footprints leading into the woods. "These are fresh," Mark said, his face pale. "She must have walked off." "But why would she leave without telling anyone?" Kyle asked, his voice trembling. We followed the footprints, calling Sandra's name into the night. The deeper we went into the woods, the more the fear took hold. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made us jump. Mark's story about Harry the Wendigo lingered in our minds, its terror taking root in our hearts. Suddenly we heard a scream, a blood-curdling primal scream that sent shivers down my spine. It was Sandra. We broke into a run, the beams of our flashlights bouncing wildly in the dark. When we found her, she was lying on the ground, unconscious but seemingly unharmed. Relief washed over us as we checked her for injuries. There were none. We couldn't explain what had happened, but we were just glad to have her back. As we carried Sandra back to the camp, Mark's story played over and over in my mind. The idea of a monster stalking us, picking us off one by one, seemed less like a story and more like a warning. When we finally got back, we settled Sandra into her sleeping bag, and the rest of us huddled together, too scared to sleep. Hours passed, and the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. The night had been long and terrifying, but we had made it through. Sandra woke up, groggy and confused, but otherwise fine. She couldn't remember anything after Mark's story, and we decided it was best not to dwell on it. We packed up camp quickly, eager to leave the woods behind. As we walked back to our cars, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had been watching all night, that something had been out there, lurking in the darkness. Years later, the memory of that night still haunts me. Mark's story about Harry the Wendigo became a legend among our friends, a tale we told around campfires to scare each other. But for me, it was more than just a story. It was a reminder of how close we had come to something truly terrifying. Something that might still be out there, waiting for the next group of campers to wander into its domain.